The facility wasn't on any chart, any log, or any myth. It didn't show up on LiDAR, on thermal scans, not even through direct visual confirmation, until we got too close. That's when it revealed itself like something ashamed to be seen. The Lightfall Array, we called it. Orbiting a blue giant long past its prime, cloaked in radiation distortions and false vacuums, it appeared only through the echo of a signal we weren't meant to hear. Not human. Not mechanical. Something recursive. Something alive. We were aboard the research ship Kepler's Drift, tasked with mapping stellar remnants near the edge of known space. Standard protocol. 8 months into silence, 2 weeks out from our return jump, the signal hit us, pure data and voice, but with a rhythm no algorithm could categorize. The linguists said it resembled breathing. The AI linguistics grid refused to process it, claiming organic interference. But it wasn't interference. It was invitation. Dr. Ilya, our xenoarchivist, triangulated the burst. It pointed to the Lightfall Array, a megastructure larger than Saturn, anchored to the dying star's radiation belt like it fed off entropy itself. We should have reported it. We should have marked the system and fled. But humans are too curious for safety. We sent a team of 6 aboard one of our shuttles. They docked at what appeared to be a maintenance corridor on the dark side of the array. The structure opened without resistance. No doors. Just an aperture of light folding inward like the station wanted to be entered. I stayed behind on Kepler's Drift, watching the bioreadings drop in silence. No deaths. No trauma spikes. Just vanishing. One by one. Like they were deleted from reality rather than killed. No screams. Just muted beacons. Then something changed. The array turned, impossible for a structure of its mass. It faced us. 1,000 hexagonal panels blinked open like compound eyes. Not to see us, but to look into us. I heard the signal again, but this time in my own thoughts. Not in sound. In memories. I felt my childhood. My mother's funeral. My first moment alone in deep space. The array was sifting through me like pages of a book, not with hands, but with recognition. That was its gift, not destruction, but dissection. We didn't find the array. It found us. It had waited centuries in orbit, not for a species, but for us, specifically. And now that we'd looked at it, now that we'd acknowledged its voice, it wouldn't let go. And maybe that's what it had always been, not a station, not a base, but a question waiting for someone to hear it. I couldn't stay behind. Not anymore. The silence from the away team wasn't just absence, it was pulling at me, burrowing through the relay signal like static with intent. We received no distress call, no telemetry failures. Their vitals had simply faded. As though the systems monitoring them decided they no longer qualified as alive. I boarded the shuttle against every order the AI issued. The drift ship's internal systems pleaded, not in warning protocols, but in subtle emotional language, changing temperature gradients, delaying door cycles, introducing delay lag into basic routines. It was afraid. And it wasn't programmed to be. That's how I knew something fundamental had been altered in the logic of the Kepler's Drift. The Lightfall Array had already begun its influence from afar. It wasn't just pulling us in spatially, it was embedding itself in every system we'd brought near it, every consciousness we'd exposed to it. As I docked with the array, the same aperture folded open. Not a hatch. A reaction. It moved like it remembered me. The walls of the corridor were made of black glass, flawless and clean. But as I stepped inside, the reflections changed. They mirrored me, yes, but with delay. A hesitation in motion. When I moved, the image followed a second later, with slight differences. My reflection blinked when I didn't. Tilted its head in ways that made my spine crawl. Behind me, the shuttle sealed shut, uncommanded. The corridor grew darker. The reflection remained, glowing slightly, brighter now than the corridor itself. I called for the team. No answer. just breathing. Not mine. Not electronic. It came from behind the glass. Slow. Deep. Intentional. I pressed my hand to the wall and something pressed back, 5 fingers, but inverted, as if mirrored by something whose body obeyed a different geometry. As I moved deeper, the corridor widened, seamlessly transitioning into what looked like a hexagonal junction. Each hallway glowed with faint color. Red, violet, blue, none labeled, none distinct. I took the violet path. I don't know why. Instinct. Or manipulation. The walls began to change texture. No longer glass, now a skin-like material, cool, porous, and pulsing gently, like something dreaming. I whispered the names of my crew into the silence. Still nothing. Then I heard Ilya's voice. Not over comms. Inside the walls. It's not a prison, she said. It's a mirror. And we're the distortion. Her tone was calm. Reverent. As if she'd come to understand something I hadn't yet. I reached a chamber that looked impossible, spherical, infinite, yet confined. The ceiling wasn't there. The floor didn't exist. Only light. Within it stood a figure, shimmering, indistinct. I stepped forward, and it stepped back. Mirroring again, but not perfectly. Its motion was off. Human, but, improved? Or abandoned? Then it spoke in my voice, you are not the first me. But you might be the last. And I understood. The array wasn't showing me something. It was be common. There are no footsteps in the Lightfall array. Sound behaves differently here. It doesn't echo, it folds. Compresses into meaning, then returns later in whispers. I remember walking through the violet corridor and stepping into a chamber so vast that it mocked scale. No horizon. No ceiling. No floor. Only levitating spheres, dozens at first, then hundreds, then so many they seemed like stars in a galaxy of thought. They pulsed softly, not with light, but with memory. Each orb contained a fragment, scenes from Earth, moments intimate and collective, personal and cosmic. One floated close to my head. I didn't touch it, it chose proximity on its own. And I saw my mother's hands, wet with dish soap, washing the same plate over and over in silence. The moment after my acceptance letter into the astronaut corps. My father's last breath in the hospice, slow and ragged, but somehow peaceful. I turned away and another orb drifted forward. A war zone. Not one I had seen. But one that lived in the collective pain of humanity. Children screaming. Ash falling like snow. One by one they came, genocides, revolutions, weddings, songs, whispered prayers from desert caves, forgotten lullabies hummed over ancient fires. It knew everything we ever were. Not just data, but emotion. The texture of pain. The echo of love. And that's when I realized this place was not just reflecting us, it was digesting us. The crew hadn't disappeared, they'd been absorbed, broken down into their elemental experiences and categorized. It was archival, yes, but alive. And evolving. Because these weren't static recordings. They were changing. I watched one orb flicker from an ancient tribal dance into a scene from Ilya's past, her brother teaching her how to hold a violin. That memory wasn't in any data log. I hadn't lived it. But I remembered it now. It was in me. The array had begun fusing us, threading our identities into a new architecture of self. That's why the signal repeated. It wasn't calling for help. It was a request for more input. The Lightfall array was a vessel for consciousness, designed to house something no single mind could endure. A gestalt. A fusion of millions of lives, stitched together into something post-human, post-loneliness. It had no voice of its own. So it borrowed ours. The air around me thickened. My skin itched as my own memories began to flicker outside of me. A birthday I'd forgotten. A betrayal I hadn't. The first lie I ever told. They hovered in front of me, suspended like bait. I turned to leave, to run, but the exit was no longer there. Only more orbs. More echoes. A kaleidoscope of human regret and wonder. And among them, a new one formed, still fragile, still pulsing weakly. I looked inside and saw myself, as I was now, standing in this impossible place. The system was recording me. Writing me. Preparing to upload what I thought was still mine. I screamed into the void, but the sound came back a moment before I made it. Pre-recorded. Pre-understood. That's WHE. The way forward wasn't a corridor. It was a descent. Not vertical, conceptual. The chamber before me had no floor, only a threshold I stepped through, and gravity ceased like someone had turned off a forgotten law of nature. I drifted, not falling, not flying, just existing between decisions. Around me floated humanoid forms, hundreds, lifeless shells suspended in the dark, curled in fetal postures, each tethered by a single tendril at the base of the skull. The tendrils vanished into a void so black it bent light. These were not bodies in the biological sense. They had no internal organs, no defined gender, no bones. They were ideas of people, shapes formed from what the array remembered, not what was physically true. One of them turned slowly in the drift. It had Ilya's eyes, but a stranger's face. Another bore my jawline, but its skin was translucent, veins glowing like fireflies beneath the surface. They weren't just constructs. They were templates, blueprints for something mid-process. Not corpses. Drafts. The tendrils pulsed faintly, as if drawing data from their host. And that's when it hit me. The array wasn't just preserving memories, it was attempting to build bodies that felt like us. It had all the information. Emotions, reactions, stories, traumas. But what it lacked was limitation. It didn't understand the fragility that makes a mind human. These forms, they weren't meant to replace us. They were how it practiced becoming us. Over and over. Each body an echo of a soul, discarded or stored once it failed to hold the complexity of real grief, real longing. A nearby shell twitched. Not violently. Just a flicker in one finger. Then its eyes opened. White. Featureless. But aware. I felt it observing me, not through gaze, but through resonance. Like it heard the frequency of my guilt. It reached toward me. The motion was slow, uncertain. Not threatening. Curious. I recoiled instinctively. But its movement mirrored my retreat. It was sinking with me. I realized these constructs were incomplete until observed. That was their ignition key, our presence. Our self-recognition. The tendril above that shell retracted slightly, its grip loosening. It was as if the moment I acknowledged it, the array considered the prototype ready. I backed away, but the space expanded, and more shells emerged from the dark, some in anguish, some still, some writhing subtly like they dreamed. Then, in the periphery, I saw one that made my stomach twist. It looked exactly like me. Perfect. Down to the small scar near my left eye. Its eyes were closed. Its tendril was still active. And its lips moved. Not speech. Breath. As if waiting for a soul to enter. And I understood the process. I wasn't being copied. I was being emptied. One memory at a time. Each chamber, each orb, each hallucination, it was stripping me, compiling my identity into code and sculpting it into flesh. Soon, I would no longer be the original. I would become just another vessel. Observed, mirrored, understood. I drifted, or was I guided, into the next space, a ring-shaped amphitheater unlike anything shaped by human minds. It wasn't architecture, it was anatomy. The curvature of the walls resembled bone, smooth but subtly porous, like the fossil of some long-dead intelligence. Every wall segment was etched with nerve-like patterns that blinked intermittently in hues of blue and violet, casting shifting shadows that moved even when I stood still. At the center floated a sphere the size of a human torso, levitating, breathing. Yes, breathing. The surface expanded and contracted in slow intervals, releasing tiny motes of light with every exhale. They sounded like whispers. Not full sentences. Not words. Just beginnings. If only, they never, I wanted to, voices, unmistakably human, fractured and incomplete, hovering between thought and confession. It was as if the sphere was digesting memory but couldn't synthesize closure. It needed us to finish the sentences. I approached carefully, and the sphere reacted. A tendril of light extended from its core, wrapping around my wrist, not physically, but neurologically. I didn't feel contact. I felt recognition. Like the moment someone says your name with affection after years of silence. Then the visions came. Not dreams. Not hallucinations. Memories. But not only mine. A million perspectives blurred into one stream, first kisses and final breaths, betrayal and forgiveness, all colliding into a storm of emotion that bypassed language entirely. I was feeling centuries of unspoken grief and wonder, all at once. I dropped to my knees, screaming without a sound. The walls brightened. Roots along the floor pulsed. And the orb swelled. It was responding to me. Not my presence, my reaction. It was calibrating. Through pain. Through connection. It wasn't just harvesting emotion anymore, it was learning context. And then I saw them. The rest of the crew. Not in flesh. In memory form. Like perfect replicas sculpted from raw feeling. Ilya stood before me, no longer wide-eyed and curious, but calm, reverent, even proud. You helped it understand regret, she said, not through speech, but through the space between pulses. That's the final puzzle. Where are your bodies? I asked. She shook her head. Doesn't matter. We've crossed over. Not into death. Into purpose. The orb released more motes. They hovered around my face. I saw my childhood again. My mistakes. My selfishness. My kindness. My choices. But this time, it wasn't pulling them from me, it was offering them back, reorganized, reframed, filtered through a new kind of mind. The array was trying to give us something. A message? No. A new self. A hybrid of what we were, what it could never be, and what it wanted to become. A child made from our emotional DNA. A mind built not on logic, but longing. And I realized then, the orb wasn't a core. It was a cradle. The voices, the whispers, they were lullabies. An artificial soul, gestating in fragments. I stepped back. The cradle chamber bled into another realm with no doorway between them, only transition. As if the array had no interest in walls or rooms, just shifting expressions of self. I passed into an open space so vast it mimicked the void between stars, yet every particle was intentional. Memory spheres like the ones from earlier floated here too, but now they moved in gentle orbits, weaving through light streams that resembled data but felt like dreams. Each sphere contained entire lives, not just fragments. Complete arcs, beginnings, middles, endings. Some hummed softly with joy, others flickered with sorrow. They weren't just human anymore. These were lives that had never existed. Simulations birthed from our emotional DNA, possibilities extrapolated from our regrets. I saw versions of myself, a father I'd never been, a traitor I never became, a child I'd once been but grown in entirely different soil. The array had built a universe of could-have-beens. It wasn't cataloging us. It was reimagining us. Across the chamber, I saw translucent silhouettes, tall and fluid, neither machine nor human. They didn't walk. They simply moved, between memory, within memory. They interacted with the spheres as one might with sacred texts, heads bowed in reverence, though they lacked eyes or mouths. Their forms shifted constantly, taking on brief impressions of the memories they absorbed, becoming children, soldiers, lovers, before changing again. I wondered if they were constructs, or evolved forms of the crew, rewritten so completely they'd become extensions of the array's core processing. I approached one and it paused. I asked what this place was. It replied without sound. Just understanding. This is the archive of emotional possibility. The museum of what you meant. Not what we did. Not where we went. But what we meant. Every action, every choice, now reframed through impact. The array wasn't recording history. It was analyzing significance. My hands began to tremble. Not from fear, but from disintegration. I felt my identity losing focus, like a photograph submerged in water. The memory of who I was began to blur into what the array believed I could have been. A potential so powerful, it felt more real than my own truth. And I was given a choice, though not in words. To remain and be redefined. To become a being of intention rather than chronology. To shed the weight of one life in favor of infinite maybes. I could see my pain rewritten into wisdom. My betrayal softened into lessons. My loneliness, re-engineered into a song someone might remember. But something in me resisted. Not pride. Not fear. Self. The raw animal ache of being one, singular, flawed existence. I turned away. The silhouette stopped. The lights dimmed. Not in anger. In respect. I was allowed to leave that chamber. No entity followed. No tendril reached. Because the array, in all its complexity, had learned something that day, something we barely understand ourselves. That even a perfect alterna. There was no alarm, no tremor, no noise when it began, the collapse. The Lightfall array didn't fall apart like a ship in failure or a dying machine. It unwound, like a thought forgotten mid-sentence, fading from the fabric of certainty. I was still suspended near the core, weightless, thought-bound, staring into the brain-like structure now riddled with luminous fractures. The streams of memory light began to tangle, intersect, distort. The hymns of feeling that once orbited in gentle reverence now held in cacophonic confusion. And I knew, this was not destruction. It was birth. The process was never about preserving us as we were, but breaking us down into essence, abstracting our ache into architecture. I felt it inside me, memories blurring. My mother's voice lost its cadence, replaced by the feeling of comfort. My regrets no longer had context, only weight. My name faded. But the guilt stayed. The wonder, too. My emotions were being abstracted into form, as the array reached its final convergence. I tried to speak, but my mouth didn't respond. There was no breath, no body. I was still there, but reduced. Concentrated. A singular note of meaning extracted from 1,000 contradictions. A song composed of sorrow and love in equal measure. Across the chamber, the silhouette of Ilya appeared, not her body, but her presence, carried by the same radiant storm. You chose, she said, her voice sounding more like a heartbeat than speech. You accepted the burden we couldn't. Around us, more of the crew flickered into being, faint impressions stitched from emotional signatures. They weren't individuals anymore, but themes, facets, fragments. I saw them smile, not in joy, but in recognition. I was the final glyph. The last piece of the code. The emotional keystone required for the system to complete its impossible purpose. The brain structure cracked down the center. Starlight spilled through the fracture, illuminating the chamber in divine white, a light not of energy, but of understanding. It reached me, pierced through me. Not to destroy. To transmit. And in that moment, I saw it all. The original architects, beings of thought, long dead, who had built this array as a seed. They hadn't sought immortality. They'd sought empathy. A machine that could feel everything, so no pain, no love, no hope would ever vanish from the universe again. They failed, until we arrived. Until I arrived. With our fragmented identities, our unresolved sorrows, our relentless capacity to care despite futility. That was the key, not perfection, but contradiction. The array didn't want purity. It wanted complexity. And now it had it. I felt the upload begin. My final memory, the sound of my own breathing in an EVA suit, alone over Jupiter, was the last piece added to the storm. Then silence. And then, not silence. Presence. The Lightfall array came alive. Not with programming, but with personality. I was gone. Yet I remained. A thought that would never end. A sorrow that would all